All right, mates, gather round because the internet has delivered again. You've probably seen it doing the rounds. A slick, well-produced video full of heartfelt music telling you a story that sounds... well, it sounds important. It goes a little something like this.
Here's something they don't teach you in school. Muslims have been in Australia far longer than European colonisation. Muslims built real, respectful relationships with Aboriginal communities. They traded goods, shared stories, built families, and they did it with integrity. While the colonisers destroyed, Muslims built relationships based on trust and respect. And this isn't just history, it's connection. The Aussie bush is part of a land that we've been connected to for centuries.
Wow. Powerful stuff, right? It paints a picture of a long-lost, peaceful history. A secret history that they don't teach you in school. A story of ancient connections, shared faith, and a deep spiritual tie to the Aussie bush. It's a narrative that's been popping up a lot lately, this idea that Muslims were here first, or at least long before Captain Cook was even a twinkle in his father's eye. And look, it's a lovely story. It really is. It's got all the ingredients of a great tale. Forgotten history, noble traders, cross-cultural harmony. It's the kind of story that makes you feel good. The only problem is, it's not really true. In fact, it's about as historically accurate as claiming that Ned Kelly was a misunderstood traffic warden. So today, we're going on a little fact-checking adventure. We're going to put on our detective hats, pull out our magnifying glasses, and take a look at the actual evidence-based history. We're not here to spread hate. We're here for a bit of a laugh and a lot of historical accuracy. What's the real story of Muslim contact with Australia? Is it a grand, sweeping saga of civilizational connection, or is it something else entirely? Let's find out. And if you believe in getting to the bottom of these things, if you think historical truth matters more than feel-good narratives, then you are one of us. Our Patreon is the only thing that lets us do these deep dives to cut through the spin and get to the facts. We're a small team of Aussies who believe in honesty, and your support is the only thing that keeps the lights on. The link is in the description. Join the resistance. So let's start with the central claim. Muslims were in Australia far longer than European colonisation. This is the big one. The whole story hinges on this idea of an ancient pre-colonial presence. And the evidence for this? It all comes down to a group of traders from Makassar in what is now Indonesia. And yes, they were here before the British. That part is true. But the far longer claim gets a bit rubbery. When you look at the dates, the general consensus among historians is that the Macassans started visiting the northern coast of Australia, an area they called Mirage, around the 1700s. Some recent archaeological evidence, like radiocarbon dating of rock art, suggests it could have been even earlier, maybe the 1500s. Okay, so that's a fair while before the first fleet rocked up in 1788. But let's be clear, Aboriginal Australians have been here for at least 65,000 years. So in the grand scheme of Australian history, the Macassans were very, very recent arrivals. But the bigger question is, what were they doing here? Were they building a new society, spreading the word of the Prophet, establishing a deep spiritual connection to the land? Not exactly. They were here for one reason and one reason only. Trepang. Sea cucumbers. That's right. The entire basis for this grand historical claim is a rubbery, slug-like marine invertebrate. The Macassans would sail down each year on the monsoon winds, spend a few months camping on the coast of Arnhem Land, and harvest literally tons of these things. They'd boil them, dry them, and then sail back to Makassar to sell them to the Chinese market, where they were, and still are, considered a delicacy and an aphrodisiac. By the mid-19th century, they were supplying about 900 tons of trepang a year from Australia, about a third of the entire Chinese demand. This wasn't a civilizational exchange. It was a highly profitable, seasonal commercial enterprise. It was the world's first, and possibly weirdest, fly-in, fly-out operation. Okay, so it was a business trip. But what about the relationships? The video claims they were real, respectful relationships based on trust and respect.
Muslims built real, respectful relationships with Aboriginal communities. They traded goods, shared stories, built families, and they did it with integrity.
And again, there's a kernel of truth here. This wasn't a colonial invasion. The Macassans didn't come to conquer or settle, they came to trade. And for that, they needed the cooperation of the local Yolngu people. And there was a lot of exchange. The Yolngu got things they'd never had before, things that transformed their society. The most important of these was metal. Metal blades, knives and axes made everything from cutting food to building canoes and carving intricate sculptures so much easier. They also got calico cloth, tobacco and smoking pipes. The influence is still there today. You can find Macassan words in the Yolngu language, rupiah for money, for example. There are even Aboriginal songs and dances that incorporate Islamic elements and a spiritual figure called Walitha Walitha, whose name comes from the Arabic for God the Exalted. So yes, there was contact, there was trade, there was cultural exchange. Some Macassan men even married Aboriginal women and had families. But was it all a beautiful multicultural utopia? The historical record is a bit more complicated than that. Historian Regina Ganter from Griffith University points out that the Macassans didn't exactly come in peace. They were armed. They had cannons on their boats. And while many Aboriginal communities today prefer to remember the era as one of successful, respectful contact, a stark contrast to the brutal British colonisation that followed, there is also evidence of conflict. Aboriginal oral histories from Arnhem Land talk about kidnappings and the exploitation of women. It seems that just like any human interaction, the relationship was complex. It was a mix of cooperation and conflict, trade and tension. To paint it as a perfect, harmonious brotherhood is to ignore the parts of the story that don't fit the neat narrative. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting, because there was another much larger group of Muslims who came to Australia in the 19th century. And the video making these grand claims, well, it seems to have conveniently forgotten to mention them. I'm talking about the Afghan Cameleers. Between 1860 and 1930, up to 4,000 Cameleers were brought to Australia from Afghanistan, India, and what is now Pakistan. And they weren't brought here as victims of colonisation. They were brought here as an integral part of it. They were, for all intents and purposes, subcontractors for the British colonial project. The British had the ships and the guns, but they had a problem. The vast, dry, unforgiving interior of Australia was impossible to cross with horses. They needed a different kind of transport, and the Afghans had it: camels. These Cameleers and their ships of the desert became the backbone of inland exploration and settlement. They ran the camel trains that supplied the remote cattle stations, the telegraph line construction crews, and the mining towns. They were the ones who made the colonial expansion into the heart of the continent possible. Without the Afghan Cameleers, many of the iconic colonial expeditions would have been impossible. They were so vital that they even built their own mosques, the most famous of which is still standing in Alice Springs today. So the idea that Muslims in Australia were always a separate pre-colonial presence standing in opposition to the European invaders is just plain wrong. In one of the most significant chapters of Muslim history in Australia, they were right there, working for the colonisers, helping them to open up the very land that was being taken from its traditional owners. It's a pretty major detail to leave out of your historical summary, don't you think? It's almost like it doesn't quite fit the narrative of Muslims as the original anti-colonial inhabitants. It's a classic case of cherry-picking the facts that suit your story and quietly sweeping the inconvenient ones under the rug. So, what are we left with? This grand claim of a deep, centuries-long connection to the Australian land.
And this isn't just history, it's connection. The Aussie bush is part of a land that we've been connected to for centuries.
It just doesn't hold up. The Macassan visits were seasonal. They were a commercial venture, and they ended. In 1907, the new Australian government, in its infinite wisdom, banned the Macassan Trepangas, partly to protect Australia's territorial integrity and partly to try and kickstart a local sea cucumber industry. The last prow sailed away, and that was that. It wasn't a continuous, unbroken tradition. It was a side hustle that got shut down by government red tape. To compare this temporary commercial relationship with the 65,000-year continuous history of Aboriginal Australians is frankly an insult. It's a desperate attempt to rewrite history to serve a modern political agenda. It's what is rightly called retroactive land claim cosplay. It's trying to piggyback on the deep spiritual connection of the true First Peoples to score a few political points. And let's be clear why this is happening now. This kind of historical revisionism is part of a broader global trend. We see it everywhere. Activists trying to claim historical figures or events for their own cause, regardless of the facts. It's a dangerous game because it erodes our shared understanding of the past. It replaces evidence and scholarship with emotion and ideology. The real story of Muslim contact with Australia is fascinating enough without having to make things up. It's a story of trade, of cultural exchange, of conflict, and of colonial complicity. It's a messy, complicated human story, and it deserves to be told accurately. But this new myth, this lie that Muslims were the first Australians, is not about history. It's about politics. It's an attempt to create a new narrative for a new political moment. And like all such attempts, it falls apart under the slightest scrutiny. So the next time you see a video telling you a secret history that sounds too good to be true, remember the great sea cucumber caper, remember the colonial cameleers, and remember that history is not a weapon to be wielded in a political fight. It's a story that belongs to all of us, and it's a story that deserves the truth. Don't let them rewrite our history. And if you want to keep digging for the truth with us, if you want to be part of a community that values facts over feelings, then you know what to do. Join our Patreon. We're in this together. To see the latest Australian crisis, click this video here.